The message came on a cold morning in December. It arrived at the United Nations building in New York City, where dozens of scientists and diplomats were doing their normal work. Nobody expected anything special to happen that day. Nobody expected the world to change forever. The signal came from deep space. It was not random noise. It was not a mistake. It was a clear message in a language that no human had ever heard before. But the strange thing was that the message also included a translation key. Whoever sent it wanted humans to understand every word. Ambassador Daniel Carter was called to the emergency meeting within the hour. He was a tall man in his early 50s with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent 30 years working in diplomacy, solving problems between countries that did not like each other. He thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. Admiral Lisa Monroe arrived at the same time. She was the head of Earth's new Space Defense Command, a military branch created just 5 years ago when humans first detected strange objects moving near Jupiter. Lisa was a serious woman who did not smile often. She had short black hair and a scar on her chin from an accident during her pilot training days. The third person in the room was Kevin Harris, the chief diplomat for extraterrestrial affairs. It was a job title that had seemed like a joke when it was created 10 years ago. Nobody was laughing now. They stood together in a dark room and watched a holographic display flicker to life. The message played in a deep, mechanical voice that made Daniel feel cold inside. The Galactic Council had finally noticed Earth. For decades, humans had been sending signals into space. They had launched probes. They had built telescopes. They had searched for any sign that they were not alone in the universe. And for decades, they had received nothing but silence. Now, the silence was broken. The message explained that the Galactic Council was a governing body, made up of 47 different species from across the galaxy. They controlled trade routes, managed conflicts, and maintained peace among their members. They had been watching Earth for some time. They had seen humans develop nuclear weapons. They had seen humans land on the moon. They had seen humans send robots to Mars. And now, the Council had decided that humanity was ready to be contacted. Earth was being invited to send a delegation to the Council's headquarters. Humans would be allowed to petition for associate membership. This was described as a great honor. The message made it clear that most species waited thousands of years before receiving such an invitation. Daniel read the message 3 times. He looked at Lisa. She looked at Kevin. Nobody spoke for a long moment. "This is real," Kevin finally said. "This is actually happening." The news could not be kept secret for long. Within a week, every person on Earth knew about the message. Some people celebrated. They danced in the streets and talked about a new age of discovery. Others were afraid. They locked their doors and prayed to their gods for protection. A few people refused to believe it at all. They said it was a trick, a lie, a government conspiracy. But the message was real. And Earth had to respond. The United Nations held an emergency assembly. Every country sent their leaders. Arguments broke out immediately. Who would go to meet the aliens? What would they say? What if it was a trap? What if the aliens wanted to invade? Daniel Carter sat quietly through most of the debates. He listened to presidents and prime ministers shout at each other. He watched generals pound their fists on tables. He saw religious leaders warn of divine punishment. Finally, someone asked for his opinion. Daniel stood up slowly. The room fell silent. "We have 2 choices," he said. "We can hide in fear and hope the universe forgets about us. Or we can walk through the door that has been opened and see what waits on the other side." I know which choice I would make. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Earth would send a delegation to meet the Galactic Council. Daniel Carter would lead it. The next few months were the busiest of Daniel's life. A team had to be assembled. A ship had to be prepared. 1,000 details had to be arranged. The ship was called the Endurance. It was humanity's first vessel, capable of traveling faster than light. The technology had been developed from alien debris found on Mars 3 years earlier. Scientists had worked day and night to understand how it worked. The Endurance was the result of their efforts. It was not pretty. It was not elegant. But it could cross the distance between stars in a matter of days, instead of centuries. Commander Nathan Cole was chosen to pilot the ship. He was the best pilot in the Space Defense Fleet, a man who had flown every type of aircraft and spacecraft that humans had ever built. He was calm under pressure and quick to make decisions. Daniel liked him immediately. Dr. Amy Lawson joined the team as the chief linguist. She had spent her entire career studying communication and language. She had learned to speak 12 human languages fluently. Now she would try to understand languages that had never been spoken on Earth. The crew included 20 other people: scientists, engineers, security officers, medical staff. Each one had been chosen for their skills and their courage. They all knew that they might not come back. On the day of departure, millions of people gathered to watch. The Endurance sat on its launch pad in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, surrounded by support ships and aircraft. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Daniel stood at the entrance of the ship and looked back at Earth. He saw the blue water and the white clouds and the green land in the distance. He wondered if he would ever see it again. Lisa Monroe was staying behind to manage Earth's defenses. She shook Daniel's hand firmly. "Bring everyone home," she said. "I will try," Daniel replied. The Endurance launched at exactly 7 o'clock in the evening. The engines roared with a sound that shook the water for miles around. The ship rose into the sky, faster and faster, until it was just a bright dot among the stars. Then the faster-than-light drive activated, and the Endurance vanished. The journey took 6 days. Daniel spent most of that time preparing for the meeting ahead. He studied everything that humans knew about the Council, which was not much. He rehearsed speeches. He planned for different outcomes. He tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. On the 7th day, the Endurance arrived at its destination. The Council's headquarters was a structure called Nexus Prime. It was not a planet. It was not a space station. It was a ring, a massive artificial world that wrapped around an artificial sun. The scale of it was beyond anything Daniel had ever imagined. Billions of beings lived there. Maybe trillions. The human mind could not easily grasp such numbers. As the Endurance approached, other ships passed by without stopping. They were ships of every shape and size, built by species that humans had never seen. None of them paid any attention to the small vessel from Earth. "We are very far from home," Amy said quietly. Daniel nodded. He watched the ring grow larger in the view screen, and he felt very small indeed. The Endurance docked at a port on the outer edge of Nexus Prime. The airlock opened with a hiss of pressure. Daniel stepped forward and took his first breath of alien air. The air smelled strange, like metal and flowers mixed together. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth's. The light was slightly bluer. Everything felt just a little bit wrong. An alien official was waiting for them. It was tall and thin, with gray skin and 4 arms. It did not smile. It did not offer any greeting. It simply looked at the humans with large black eyes and spoke in a flat voice. "You are the Earth delegation. Follow me." The humans followed. They walked through corridors that seemed to go on forever. They passed beings of every description. Some walked on 2 legs. Some walked on 4. Some floated in the air. Some slithered along the ground. None of them looked at the humans. None of them seemed to care. Daniel realized something that made his stomach tight with worry. Earth had spent decades dreaming of this moment. Humans had imagined first contact as a historic event, a turning point in history. But for the rest of the galaxy, this was nothing special. Earth was just another small planet with another primitive species asking for attention. They were not special. They were not important. They were nobody. The official led them to a waiting area and told them to stay. Someone would come for them when it was their turn. The official did not say when that would be. The official did not seem to care. Daniel sat down on a bench that was not designed for human bodies. He looked around at the other beings waiting in the room. Some had been there for a long time. He could tell by the way they sat, slumped and tired. With no hope in their eyes, Kevin sat down beside him. "This is not what I expected," Kevin said. Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, it is not, but they had come too far to turn back now. Whatever happened next, humanity would face it together." Daniel closed his eyes and waited for the summons that would decide the future of his entire species. The Endurance returned to Earth 6 days later. The ship appeared in the sky above the Pacific Ocean, exactly where it had launched from weeks before. Thousands of people were waiting. Cameras from every news station on the planet were pointed at the sky. When the ship landed, the whole world was watching. Daniel Carter was the first to step off. He walked down the ramp and stood on the metal platform, looking out at the crowd. Reporters were shouting questions. Military officials were waiting with serious faces. Politicians were pushing forward, trying to be seen. Admiral Lisa Monroe met him at the bottom of the ramp. She did not smile. Her face was unreadable. "What happened out there?" she asked. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he told her the truth. "We said no. The news spread across the planet within hours. Every screen, every radio, every communication device carried the story. The human delegation had refused membership in the Galactic Council. Earth had rejected the most powerful organization in the known universe." Reactions were immediate and divided. Some people were proud. They celebrated in the streets, waving flags and singing songs about human courage. They called Daniel Carter a hero. They said he had saved humanity from alien slavery. Others were terrified. They demanded answers. They wanted to know why the delegation had thrown away the chance of a lifetime. They warned of alien attacks. They predicted doom and destruction. Politicians called for investigations. Some wanted Daniel arrested for exceeding his authority. Others wanted to give him medals. The United Nations held emergency sessions that lasted for days. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone was shouting but the expected attack never came. Weeks passed. Human astronomers watched the skies with every telescope they had. They scanned for fleet movements. They listened for threatening messages. They prepared for the worst. Nothing happened. The Galactic Council simply stopped talking to Earth. The communication channels went silent. The signals stopped coming. It was as if humanity had been erased from the galactic map. First, this scared people even more than an attack would have. The silence felt like a threat, like a storm building on the horizon. People waited for something terrible to happen. But the terrible thing never arrived. Months passed. Then a year. The fear began to fade. Life on Earth continued. People went back to their jobs and their families. The story of the delegation became history, something taught in schools and discussed in documentaries. Daniel Carter returned to his work at the United Nations. He spent most of his time answering questions and giving interviews. Everyone wanted to know what he had been thinking. Everyone wanted to understand why he had done what he did. He always gave the same answer. He had done what he believed was right. He had refused to sell humanity's future for the promise of protection. He had chosen freedom over safety. Not everyone agreed with him. Many people thought he had made a terrible mistake. They believed that humanity needed the Council's technology and protection. They feared that Earth was now defenseless against whatever dangers lurked in the darkness between stars. But Daniel did not regret his decision. Not even for a moment. About 18 months after the delegation returned, something unexpected happened. A small ship appeared at the edge of the solar system. It was not a council ship. It was something different, something that human sensors had never seen before. The ship sent a message to Earth. The message was friendly. It came from a species called the Veth, a reptilian race that lived on the far side of the galaxy. They had heard about what happened at Nexus Prime. They had heard that Earth had refused the Council's terms, and they wanted to talk. Commander Nathan Cole was sent to meet them. He took the Endurance to the edge of the solar system and made contact with the Veth ship. The meeting was tense at first. Nathan did not know what to expect. He did not know if this was a trick or a trap, but the Veth were genuine. Their representative, a tall reptile with golden scales and sharp teeth, explained why they had come. The Galactic Council was not the only power in the universe. There were other species, other groups, other ways of living. Many of these species had chosen to stay outside the Council's control. Some had been rejected. Some had walked away, just like the humans had. These species called themselves the Unaligned. The Unaligned did not have a central government. They did not demand tribute or conscription. They simply traded and cooperated and helped each other when needed. They believed that every species had the right to control its own destiny. And they were very interested in Earth. Nathan returned home with this news. The reaction was mixed, but mostly hopeful. Perhaps humanity was not as alone as everyone had feared. Perhaps there were friends out there after all. Kevin Harris was chosen to lead a new diplomatic mission. He traveled to meet the Unaligned at a station in neutral space. What he found amazed him. The Unaligned were not primitive outcasts. Many of them had technology that matched or exceeded the Council's. They had developed their own solutions to the challenges of space travel. They had built their own networks and their own alliances. One species had mastered energy generation. Another had perfected medical technology that could cure almost any disease. Another had developed food production systems that could feed billions with minimal resources. These species had chosen independence over submission. They had decided that freedom was worth more than the protection offered by the Council. And they had survived. They had thrived. Kevin returned to Earth with trade agreements and alliance proposals. The Unaligned wanted to work with humanity. They admired what the human delegation had done. They saw Earth as a potential partner in their loose network of free species. For the first time since refusing the Council, Earth had real allies. The changes came quickly after that. New technologies arrived from unaligned traders. Human scientists studied these technologies and learned how they worked. Improvements spread across the planet. Energy became cheaper. Medicine became more effective. Food production increased. The Endurance was upgraded with better engines and stronger shields. New ships were built using the improved designs. Humanity's presence in space grew rapidly. Within 3 years, humans had colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter. Within 5 years, they had ventured beyond the solar system for the first time, exploring nearby stars and discovering new worlds. Amy Lawson led a team of linguists who worked to understand the languages of the Unaligned. They created translation systems and communication protocols. They built bridges between cultures that had developed on opposite sides of the galaxy. Daniel Carter watched all of this happen with quiet satisfaction. He had not known what would come after the walk. He had not known if his decision would lead to prosperity or disaster. But he had believed in humanity's ability to find its own way, and humanity was proving him right. Not everything was perfect, of course. There were challenges and setbacks. Some trade deals went badly. Some expeditions ended in tragedy. The universe was still a dangerous place, full of unknowns and uncertainties. But Earth was growing. Earth was learning. Earth was becoming something more than it had ever been before. The Galactic Council continued to ignore humanity. Their ships never approached Earth's territory. Their messages never came. They acted as if the human race simply did not exist. Some people found this insulting. Others found it reassuring. Daniel found it almost amusing. The most powerful organization in the galaxy had been so offended by a simple refusal that they had decided to pretend Earth was not real. They had expected humans to beg for forgiveness, to come crawling back and accept any terms offered. Instead, humanity had moved on without them. It was, Daniel thought, exactly what the Council deserved. As the years passed, more species reached out to Earth. Some were members of the unaligned who wanted to expand trade relations. Others were species that had never heard of humanity before, but were curious about the newcomers who had said no. A few were species that were still members of the Council, but were beginning to have doubts. They sent secret messages through hidden channels. They asked questions about life outside the Council's control. They wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was another way. Daniel answered these messages carefully. He did not try to convince anyone to leave the Council. He simply told the truth about humanity's experience. He explained why Earth had refused. He described what life was like now. The seeds of doubt, once planted, have a way of growing on their own. By the end of the 5th year, humanity had transformed from a small, isolated species into a recognized member of the galactic community, one that did not need the Council's approval to exist. Earth had allies and trade partners. Earth had ships and colonies and growing influence. And it had all started with one word. No. Daniel thought about that word often. Such a small word, such a simple sound. But it had changed everything. He wondered what would happen next. He wondered what the Council would do when they realized that humanity was not going to fade away. He wondered what new challenges and opportunities awaited in the vast darkness between the stars. He did not know the answers. Nobody did, but he was not worried. Whatever came next, humanity would face it the same way they had faced the Council. Together on their own terms, standing tall and unafraid. 3 weeks passed in the waiting area. 3 weeks of sitting on uncomfortable benches. 3 weeks of eating strange food that tasted like nothing. 3 weeks of watching other species come and go while the humans remained forgotten. Daniel tried to stay calm. He reminded himself that patience was important in diplomacy. He told his team to rest and prepare. But inside, his frustration was growing. Earth had sent its best people across the galaxy, and nobody seemed to care. Kevin spent his time talking to other waiting delegations. He learned that some of them had been there for months. A few had been waiting for years. One small creature with blue fur told Kevin that his species had been petitioning for membership for over a century. They kept being told to wait a little longer. Amy worked on her language skills. She listened to the announcements that played through the station and tried to identify patterns. She made notes on her tablet and practiced speaking phrases out loud. Some of the other waiting beings looked at her strangely, but she did not care. Nathan stayed near the Endurance, making sure the ship was ready to leave at any moment. He did not trust this place. He did not like the way the station officials looked at humans, like they were insects that had wandered into a palace. On the 22nd day, a new official came to the waiting area. This one was different from the others. It was short and round, with green skin and a wide mouth full of tiny teeth. It carried a glowing tablet in its 3-fingered hands. Earth delegation, it called out. Your audience has been scheduled. Follow me. Daniel stood up quickly. His heart was beating fast. Finally, after all this waiting, they would get their chance. The official led them through a maze of corridors. The walls were decorated with symbols and images that Daniel did not understand. He saw statues of strange creatures and paintings of distant worlds. Everything was designed to show power and history. Everything was designed to make visitors feel small. They entered a large circular room. In the center was a platform where the petitioning species would stand. Around the edges, rising up like seats in a theater, were the places where the council members sat. There were 47 of them, representing the 47 species that ruled the galaxy. Daniel looked up at them. He saw creatures of every shape and size. Some were massive, with bodies like mountains. Others were tiny, floating in small glass spheres. Some looked almost human. Others looked like nothing from Earth's nightmares. At the highest point sat the High Arbiter. His name was Vorn, and he was a member of a species called the Keth. He had a body like a giant insect, with hard black armor covering his chest and long legs that bent at strange angles. His head was triangular, with two large compound eyes that reflected the light like broken mirrors. When he moved, his joints clicked and scraped against each other. Vorn looked down at the humans with no expression. His mandibles clicked together slowly, making a sound like stones grinding. The Earth delegation, Vorn announced. Species designation 4-7-3-9. You have been granted permission to petition for associate membership in the Galactic Council. You will now hear the terms of this membership. You will accept or decline. There will be no negotiation. Daniel stepped forward onto the platform. His team stood behind him. He tried to stand tall, but the weight of all those alien eyes made his shoulders want to bend. A holographic display appeared in front of him. Words scrolled across it, translated into English by the station systems. Daniel read them carefully. With each line, his heart sank a little deeper. The terms were worse than anything he had imagined. Earth would be granted associate membership for a probationary period of 500 standard years. During this time, humans would not be allowed to leave their own solar system without council permission. Any human ship found in council space without approval would be destroyed. Earth would pay tribute to the council. The tribute would consist of rare minerals, biological samples, and other resources. The amounts listed were staggering. To meet these demands, humans would have to strip their own planet bare. They would have to mine their moon and their asteroids. They would have to give everything they had. Human colonies would require council approval. Any expansion would be monitored and controlled. Humans would not be allowed to grow beyond what the council considered acceptable. And then Daniel read the final term. His hands began to shake. All junior species were required to provide military conscripts for the council's peacekeeping forces. Earth would send 2 million young humans every standard year to serve in the council's armies. They would fight in wars on the other side of the galaxy. They would die for causes they did not understand. They would never come home. In exchange for all of this, Earth would receive protection from hostile species. Earth would be given access to basic technologies that the Council considered obsolete. Earth would be allowed to exist. Daniel read the terms twice. He read them 3 times. He hoped he had misunderstood something. He hoped the translation was wrong, but the translation was correct. The terms were exactly what they appeared to be. Kevin leaned close to Daniel's ear. "This is not a partnership," he whispered. "This is slavery with extra steps." Daniel nodded slowly. He looked up at High Arbiter Vorn. He looked at the 47 council members staring down at him. He saw no sympathy in their eyes. He saw no kindness. He saw only the cold calculation of beings who had been taking whatever they wanted for thousands of years. He asked for time to consult with his government. Vorn's mandibles clicked with what might have been annoyance. "You have 1 standard day. When you return, you will give your answer. Be grateful for the opportunity you have been given." Most species are not so fortunate. The humans were escorted back to their waiting area. Daniel walked in silence. His mind was racing with thoughts he could not organize. That night, aboard the Endurance, the delegation held an emergency meeting. Everyone sat around the table in the small conference room. The air was thick with tension. Nathan spoke first. He had been doing research on the Council's military capabilities. The numbers were terrifying. The Council had millions of ships. They had weapons that could destroy entire planets. If Earth refused the terms and the Council decided to attack, humanity would be erased from existence in a matter of hours. But Kevin had found something interesting. He had been talking to other species in the waiting area. He'd been asking questions and listening carefully to the answers. The Council has never actually attacked a species that refused membership, Kevin said. It has never happened. Not once in 10,000 years. Why not? Amy asked. Kevin shrugged. Pride, maybe. They consider it beneath them. If a species refuses, they simply cut them off. No contact. No trade. No acknowledgement. The refused species becomes invisible to the rest of the galaxy. So we would be alone. Nathan said. We are already alone, Daniel replied quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. He had been sitting in silence, staring at the wall. Now he looked up, and his eyes were clear. Think about what they are offering us, Daniel said. 500 years of probation. Our children sent to die in foreign wars. Our planet stripped of resources. Our future controlled by beings who do not care if we live or die. And in exchange, we receive the privilege of existing. He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the stars burned in the darkness, cold and distant. I have spent my life as a diplomat, Daniel continued. I have made many compromises. I have accepted many bad deals because they were better than the alternative. But this is not a deal. This is surrender. And I will not surrender the future of humanity to beings who see us as nothing more than tools to be used and discarded. Lisa Monroe was not there in person, but she was watching through a video connection from Earth. Her face appeared on the screen, grave and thoughtful. If you refuse, she said, we may never get another chance. The Council may ignore us forever. We will have to build our future completely alone. Daniel nodded. Then that is what we will do. I would rather be alone and free than be a slave with company. The room was silent. Everyone understood the weight of what Daniel was saying. He was not just refusing a diplomatic offer. He was choosing a path that would define humanity's place in the universe for centuries to come. One by one, the others nodded their agreement. Nathan, Amy, Kevin, all 20 members of the delegation. They stood together, united in their decision. Tomorrow, Daniel said, we will give the Council our answer. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his quarters and looked at the stars, thinking about Earth, thinking about all the people who would never know what happened in this room, thinking about the children who would grow up free because of the choice he was about to make. When the artificial sun of Nexus Prime rose the next morning, Daniel Carter was ready. The council chamber was full when the human delegation returned. Word had spread through Nexus Prime that the newcomers from the small blue planet were about to give their answer. Representatives from dozens of species had come to watch. Some were curious. Some were bored. Most expected to see another young species bow down and accept their place in the galactic order. Daniel Carter walked at the front of the group. He wore his best suit, the one he saved for important occasions. His shoes were polished. His hair was combed. He wanted to look his best for what he was about to do. Behind him walked Tevin Harris and Amy Lawson. Behind them came Nathan Cole and the rest of the delegation. 23 humans in total, moving together like a single unit. Their faces were calm, but their hearts were beating fast. The chamber was vast. Daniel had seen it before, but it still made him feel small. The ceiling was so high that he could not see it. The walls curved upward and disappeared in the shadow. The seats of the council members rose around him like cliffs on every side. High Arbiter Vorn sat at the highest point, his compound eyes watching the humans approach. His mandibles clicked together slowly, making that terrible grinding sound. Other council members whispered to each other in languages that the translation systems did not bother to convert. The humans reached the center platform. Daniel stepped forward and stood alone in the light. A spotlight from somewhere above made him easy to see. He could feel the eyes of thousands of beings looking down at him. Vorn raised one of his long jointed arms. The chamber fell silent. The Earth delegation has returned, Vorn announced. Ambassador Daniel Carter, you have reviewed the terms of associate membership. You have consulted with your government. Are you prepared to give your answer? Daniel took a deep breath. His hands were steady at his sides. His voice was calm when he spoke. I am prepared, High Arbiter. Then speak, Vorn said. Accept the generous terms offered by this council, and your species will take its place among the civilized peoples of the galaxy. Daniel nodded slowly. He looked around the chamber at all the faces watching him. He saw creatures of every shape and color. He saw the ancient and the powerful and the mighty. He saw a galaxy that had existed for billions of years before. Humans had crawled out of the mud, and he was not afraid. High Arbiter Vorn, Daniel began. I thank you for allowing Earth to petition for membership. I thank you for explaining the terms of that membership. I thank you for giving us time to consider our response. Vorn's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. The human was following the proper forms. Good. Daniel continued. Humanity has always dreamed of the stars. We have looked up at the night sky and wondered what was out there. We have imagined meeting other species, learning from them, growing alongside them. When your message arrived, many of us believed that our dreams had finally come true. Some of the council members nodded. They had heard speeches like this before. Every young species talked about dreams and hopes and the wonder of discovery. It was all very predictable, but Daniel's tone changed. However, he said, we have also learned something important during our time here. We have learned that the Galactic Council is not what we imagined. You do not seek partners. You seek servants. You do not offer opportunity. You offer chains. The chamber went quiet. The whispers stopped. Vorn's mandibles froze mid-click. We have read your terms, Daniel said. 500 years of probation. Tribute that would destroy our planet. Restrictions that would strangle our growth. And the demand that we send our children to die in wars that are not ours, for species who see them as expendable tools. His voice grew stronger. These are not the terms of membership. These are the terms of slavery, and I will not accept them. A murmur ran through the chamber. Some council members leaned forward in their seats. Others looked at each other with confusion. This was not how petitions were supposed to go. Vorn's compound eyes seemed to grow darker. His voice carried a warning. Ambassador Carter, I advise you to consider your words carefully. The Galactic Council has ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. We have seen species rise and fall. We have crushed rebellions and ended wars. You are a young race from a small planet. You are nothing compared to the powers assembled in this chamber. Daniel did not flinch. You are right, he said. We are young. We are small. We have no great fleet, no ancient history, no powerful weapons. By your standards, we are nothing. He paused and looked directly at Vorn. But we would rather be nothing on our own terms than be something on yours. The chamber erupted in noise. Council members shouted at each other. Some laughed. Some screamed with outrage. The sound was overwhelming, a wall of alien voices crashing together. Vorn raised his arms and called for silence. Slowly, the noise died down. You refuse? Vorn asked. His voice was cold with disbelief. You actually refuse the honor we have offered? I do, Daniel said simply. Then you are fools, Vorn replied. No species has ever walked away from this chamber. It is unprecedented. It is unacceptable. You will return to that platform and you will accept our terms, or you will face the consequences. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, we will not. He turned away from Vorn. He turned away from the council. He faced his team and gave them a small nod. Then, without another word, Daniel Carter began to walk toward the exit. The other humans followed. Kevin Harris fell into step beside Daniel. Amy Lawson walked close behind. Nathan Cole and the rest of the delegation formed a line and moved together toward the massive doors at the far end of the chamber. The council watched in stunned silence. For a moment, nobody seemed to know what to do. This had never happened before. In 10,000 years of galactic history, no species had ever simply walked away. Then Vorn found his voice. Stop. He shouted. His mandibles clicked furiously. Stop immediately. You cannot leave. This is the Galactic Council. We are the supreme authority in this galaxy. You will return to the platform. Daniel did not look back. He kept walking. I command you to stop. Vorn screamed. There will be consequences for this. Your planet will be cut off. Your species will be forgotten. You will regret this insult for the rest of your existence. Daniel reached the doors. He placed his hand on the panel, and they began to slide open. For the first time since arriving on Nexus Prime, Daniel Carter smiled. He stepped through the doors. His team followed. One by one, the humans left the chamber. The last one through was Nathan Cole, who paused for just a moment to look back at the chaos they were leaving behind. The doors closed behind them with a heavy sound, cutting off the screaming of the High Arbiter and the uproar of the council. The humans stood in the corridor, alone and quiet. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Kevin let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. Did we really just do that? He asked. We did, Daniel replied. Annie was shaking, but she was also smiling. I cannot believe it worked. They did not even try to stop us. Nathan looked down the corridor toward the docking bay. We should leave, now, before they change their minds. Daniel nodded. He agreed completely. They walked quickly through the station, following the route they had memorized during their weeks of waiting. The corridors that had seemed endless before now seemed to fly past. Every turn brought them closer to the Endurance. Every step was a step toward home. Other beings watched them pass. Word was spreading through the station. The strange newcomers had done something incredible. They had said no. Some watched with shock. Some watched with anger. But a few, Daniel noticed, watched with something that looked almost like admiration. They reached the docking bay. The Endurance was waiting, its hull gleaming under the artificial lights. The crew rushed aboard and took their stations. Nathan ran to the cockpit and began the launch sequence. Daniel stood at the airlock, looking back one last time at Nexus Prime. He thought about everything that had happened in this place. He thought about the indifference and the arrogance and the cold calculations of beings who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, and he thought about what he had just done. The airlock closed. The clamps released. The Endurance lifted off and began to move away from the station. Through the windows, Daniel watched the ring world grow smaller and smaller. He watched the massive structure that housed trillions of beings shrink to the size of his hand, then his thumb, then a dot of light among the stars. Kevin stood beside him. What do you think will happen now? Kevin asked. Daniel shook his head. I do not know. Maybe they will forget about us. Maybe they will try to punish us. Maybe something else entirely. Are you scared? Daniel thought about the question. He thought about Earth so far away. He thought about the children who would grow up without knowing what had almost happened. He thought about the future that was now uncertain but free. No, he said finally. I am not scared. I am hopeful that the Endurance activated its faster-than-light drive. The stars stretched into lines of light, and the small ship carrying the human delegation disappeared into the darkness, heading home. Behind them, the Galactic Council was still trying to figure out what had just happened. They would be trying for a very long time. 10 years had passed since the walk. Earth was no longer the same planet it had been when Daniel Carter first boarded the Endurance. Cities had grown cleaner and brighter. Poverty had decreased. Disease had become rare. The technologies shared by the unaligned had lifted humanity to new heights. Space stations orbited Earth and Mars. Colonies dotted the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Mining operations extracted resources from asteroids. Research vessels explored distant stars. Humanity had spread across the solar system and was beginning to reach beyond it. Daniel Carter was 65 years old now. His hair was white and his face was lined with age. He had retired from diplomatic work 3 years earlier, choosing to spend his remaining time teaching at a university in Geneva. His students were young people who had grown up knowing that the universe was full of life, that Earth had allies and enemies and a future among the stars. He told them stories about the old days, about the message that arrived from space, about the journey to Nexus Prime, about the council chamber and the terrible terms and the moment. When he decided to say no, the students listened with wide eyes. To them, these events were history. They could not imagine a time when humanity had been alone and afraid, facing a choice between slavery and isolation. One student asked him if he had been scared. Daniel smiled. "Of course I was scared," he said. "Anyone who says they were not scared in a situation like that is either lying or crazy. But fear does not have to control you. You can be scared and still do what is right." Another student asked what had given him the courage to walk away. Daniel thought about the question for a long moment. Then he answered, "I thought about my children," he said. "I thought about their children and their children after that. I thought about all the generations of humans who would come after us. And I asked myself what kind of future I wanted to give them. A future of kneeling and obeying? Or a future of standing tall and choosing their own path?" The answer was obvious. His students nodded. They understood. They were living in the future he had fought to protect. While Daniel taught his classes, the rest of the galaxy was changing too. The unaligned had grown stronger over the decade. More species had joined their network. Trade routes expanded. Cooperation increased. What had once been a loose collection of outcasts was becoming a real alternative to the Council's dominance. The Galactic Council watched this happen with growing concern. High Arbiter Vorn still ruled from his throne on Nexus Prime, but his power was not what it used to be. Several junior species had begun questioning the Council's demands. A few had even stopped paying tribute. And everywhere, beings whispered about the humans. The small species from the small planet that had dared to say no. The ones who had walked away and survived. The ones who had proven that the Council was not all-powerful. Vorn hated the humans. He hated what they represented. He hated that their refusal had planted seeds of doubt throughout the galaxy. Every year, the Council's grip weakened a little more. Every year, more species wondered if maybe they could walk away too. Something had to be done. Vorn summoned his advisors. They discussed options for weeks. Military action was considered and rejected. The Council had never attacked a species that refused membership. To do so now would shatter the image of noble superiority that the Council had maintained for millennia. Instead, they decided on a different approach. They would send an envoy to Earth. They would offer better terms. They would try to bring humanity back into the fold. If the humans accepted, it would prove that even the most defiant species eventually recognized the Council's supremacy. The envoy was a senior diplomat named Kreth. a member of a species known for their skill in negotiation. Kreth traveled to Earth with a delegation of advisors and guards. Their ship was magnificent, designed to impress primitive species with its size and power. Lisa Monroe, now serving as Earth's Secretary of Defense, greeted them at the orbital station above the planet. She was polite but not friendly. She remembered the terms that had been offered 10 years ago. She remembered the arrogance and the contempt. Kreth was surprised by what he found. He had expected to see a struggling species, weakened by isolation and desperate for help. Instead, he saw a thriving civilization with advanced technology and confident people. The orbital station was crowded with ships from a dozen different species, all trading and cooperating with humanity. This was not what the Council had expected. Kreth delivered his message to the United Earth Assembly, the governing body that had been established to handle humanity's growing interstellar affairs. He presented the revised terms with great ceremony. The tribute demands had been reduced by half. The conscription requirement had been made voluntary. Humans would be granted junior member status immediately, without a probationary period. The Council was being generous, Kreth explained. They were giving humanity a second chance. The Assembly listened in silence. Then they asked for time to consider the offer. Daniel Carter was invited to address the Assembly the following day. He was old now, and his voice was softer than it used to be. But the Assembly fell silent when he stood to speak. "I stood in this position once before," Daniel said. "Not in this room, but in another chamber far from here. I was asked to accept terms that would have made us servants instead of citizens. I refused." He looked around at the representatives gathered before him. Many of them had not been born when he made his famous walk, but they knew the story. Everyone knew the story. "Now we are being offered better terms," Daniel continued. "Less tribute, voluntary conscription, immediate membership. The Council believes this is generous. They believe we should be grateful." He shook his head slowly. "But I ask you to consider why these terms are being offered now. Is it because the Council suddenly respects us? Is it because they have changed their views about what junior species deserve? No, it is because they are afraid. They see what we have built. They see our alliances and our ships and our growing influence. They see that we did not need them to survive." Daniel's voice grew stronger. "They are not offering us partnership. They are trying to control us before it is too late. They want to bring us into their system so they can limit our growth and use our strength for their purposes. The terms are better, but the intent is the same." He paused and looked at each representative in turn. 10 years ago, I asked myself what kind of future I wanted to give our children. Today, I ask you the same question. Do we trade our freedom for slightly better chains? Or do we continue on the path we have chosen, the path of independence and self-determination? The Assembly debated for hours. But when the vote was called, the result was decisive. Earth refused the Council's offer for the second time. Kreth returned to Rizdu Nexus Prime with empty hands. His report sent shockwaves through the Council. The humans had not just refused once. They had refused twice. They were growing stronger every year. And now, other species were watching and wondering if they should do the same. Within 5 years of the second refusal, 3 more species left the Council. Then 5 more. Then a dozen. The trickle became a stream. The stream became a flood. The careful balance of power that had held for millennia began to shift. High, Arbiter Vaughn watched his empire crumble from his throne on Nexus Prime. He could not understand what had gone wrong. His species had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had built something that was supposed to last forever, and it had all begun to fall apart because of one small planet and one simple word: Daniel. Carter did not live to see the Council's final decline. He died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, surrounded by family and friends. His funeral was attended by representatives from dozens of species, including many from the unaligned, who had come to honor the man who had started it all. But his legacy lived on, centuries later. When children across the galaxy learned about the history of interstellar civilization, they learned about the moment when everything changed. They learned about a small species from a small planet who had been offered a place in the greatest empire the universe had ever known. And they learned about the ambassador who had looked at that empire and said no. The story was told in schools and homes and gathering places on 1,000 worlds. It became legend. It became myth. It became the foundation of a new way of thinking about power and freedom and the rights of all beings. The Galactic Council eventually faded into history. Its Ringworld headquarters became a museum, a reminder of what had been and what would never be again. New alliances rose in its place, alliances built on cooperation rather than domination, on partnership rather than submission. And at the center of it all was the small blue planet called Earth, home to a species that had taught the galaxy an important lesson. The universe was vast and full of wonders. There were powers beyond imagination and dangers beyond counting. But there was nothing in all that vastness more important than the right to stand on your own feet and choose your own path. Humans had understood that from the beginning. It had taken the rest of the galaxy a little longer to learn, but they had learned. And the galaxy was better for it. In the end. That was Daniel Carter's greatest legacy. Not the moment when he walked away. Not the refusal that shocked the council. But the idea that had driven both. Freedom was worth fighting for. Dignity was worth protecting. And